just going to do some quick introductions here. Marcy first. Marcy Lowe, CEO of Datchy Research, has 25 years of experience in economic analysis and public policy, with a focus on land use, rural development, and climate resilience. Lowe's op-eds and more than 40 articles have appeared in the Washington Post, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Technology Review, and others. And then Michael Willis. The Willis family manages a large farm located in Gentry County, Missouri, where the average farm size is 290 acres. The land farmed by the Willis family supports 1,000 acres of crop ground, 500 acres of hay and pasture ground, and 120 head cow-calf operation. Michael and his father and brother have established a diverse rotation for their cash crops of soybeans and corn, and sometimes wheat, particularly on erosion-prone grounds where they would like to build terraces. So with that, I'm going to open it up, or I'm going to call in, or Marcy up. For your front piece.
Okay, great.
High diversity and I used to have an employee who was 6'5", and we walked around the other people one. This is really cracked up. So hold this. By the time this is physics, right? Can y'all hear me? I see. My 6'5" employee, by the way, was a woman. She was awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction, Jen, and I'm really, really glad to be here. I'm really honored to be here in such a strong conservation district. I work a fair bit with the National Association of Conservation Districts, and apparently you stand out for me a really, really strong one. So it's really great. And I'm also honored with Michael, who is one of our case study farmers. I'll be presenting some case studies of cover crop and no-till farmers and looking at the economics. Not in the big sense that Keith shared, but in the, in the bottom line for a farmer, literally, financially. And Michael is one of our case study farmers, and I'm going to try to be pretty quick with my presentation because I think people have a lot of questions for Michael. But anyway, we hope to do more case studies nationwide to draw more complete. And our case studies are not from this region. They're from the upper Mississippi River Basin, so they're quite different. But I will share the method that we used and the key takeaways, and also, as I said, leave a lot of time for questions. A little background on our 4 cases. We all are pretty agreed on the benefits of cover crops, but we need more hard data on the farm level economics. So what works, when, how, why. Our audience for our case studies is farmers. We wanted our case studies to be quick to read. This is what they look like. And I'd like to, before I forget to tell y'all, I'd like to leave these out for you. See, there's a QR code. You can just scan it with your phone, and then it takes you straight to the case study, so you have all 4 of them online. But anyway, farming is so individualized that what we really sought out to answer is, how would this work on our farm? So we presented not just the financial numbers, but also a real narrative for what the farmer did, when, what they learned, what they thought they should do. These are the 4 case studies that we did, 1 in northern Iowa, 2 in Illinois, and 1 in Missouri. And that's my first program. We tried to get a little bit of diversity in farm size, so they ranged from 25 acres all the way up to 2,300. They were all corn soybean rotation farmers, some with hog and cow operations. And the method we used was partial budget analysis. We focused on the changes in income attributed to adoption of the practice. We did a lot of interviewing and vetting of different farmers until we found some that had enough good data that we could set a baseline. And then all of our findings were based on comparison with that baseline. Note that for this study, the Kuntz family farm tracked no-till only. They've been doing it for 23 years. And they didn't adopt cover crops. And so we kind of switched gears and said, well, let's look at those 23 years. Let's take, since it's a 3-year study, let's take the beginning and the midpoint and the most recent year of that span and show those findings. Partial budget analysis, we used these categories and tracked them. We had some help from NRCS economists along the way. All the changes are expressed in dollars per acre. And you can see that most of these categories have subcategories, and they're all the final category, of course, was yield in order to get the net change in income. And here, just to jump to the end, here are our findings overall. Compared to the baseline, each farm had its own baseline. Compared to the baseline, the planting costs increased for cover crops by up to $38 per acre. The fertilizer costs decreased by up to $50 per acre. Erosion repair costs decreased by up to $60 per acre. And yields increased by up to $76 measured in per acre terms and dollars per acre. And yearly net change in income ranged from a negative of $83 per acre to $110 per acre. Now I'd like to show you a little bit about what that looked like, and I'll take it from Michael's case. It shows the changes in income that Michael attributed to cover crops across fields, dollars per acre. In the category for Vetch on the previous slide, you'll notice that he spent more on planting. Spent more on planting, more on learning activities, and that was time spent trainings, web research. And the main positive change was fertilizer application. And that's $16 per acre. I'll let Michael talk more about those details. He's much better than I am, obviously. So that was the first year, 2013, first year of Michael's experiment. This is 2016. And you'll see that he was well rewarded for his experiment. You'll see that the fertilizer application had a savings of 24.6. This year, he had a very well-timed reduction. This fertilizer application, not like in 2013, he was really rewarded for that. I encourage you to look at Michael's case and all of the others for all the details, because they're all in there. It's really, really quite detailed. So I'd like to give, it's kind of hard to draw conclusions across case studies because they're so highly individualized, but we can still get the range of changes in income. The Coons family following this first one. That was the no-till only. But among the 3 cover crop farms, you'll see a wide range of changes in income associated with the planting, all the way from $37 in costs, all the way up to less than $15 in costs. In the range of changes in income associated with fertilizer application, the max and the min on this chart, when you don't see blue, it means there was no change reported. So again, you have kind of a big range from $50 all the way down to no change, or the smallest change was around $20. And the range of changes in income associated with erosion repair. Similarly, you have a maximum of $16.33 per acre. Other farmers experienced no change in some years, or a very small change of less than $1. Here's what that looked like in the table in terms of the net change in income for the 3 cover crop farms. As much as a $38.61 net decrease in per acre income, and that was Frank Moore, the one in northern Iowa, all the way to Michael, who did his experiment for 4 years and had a net change in income average spread across those 4 years of $1.08. You'll see that the changes in yields were quite positive. Diaz had 2388 over his 5 years of practice with cover crops. Michael Willis had $14.69 over 4 years of practice. And Frank Moore in Northern Iowa reported no change that he would attribute to cover crops over his 3 years. And this is what that looks like. We were asked to go ahead and put it on the averages within each farmer over the period of their experimentation by category. So the light blue is erosion-related repairs. That's Mr. Diaz over 5 years, erosion-related repairs. The average change in income was $10.45. And the dark blue is fertilizer application. You'll see that it was positive for 2 of the 3 cover crop farmers, $13 and $10. And then planting, it was a cost for everyone, ranging from $27.96 to $32.56. That's how that broke out. And this is what it looks like over the years. We didn't have anything very linear. We didn't have the hockey stick that everybody would love to see. But this is Diaz, his 5-year experiment. The purple is the net change in income, and the brown is the net change in yield.
I have a question for you. How are you accounting for the fluctuation in what you are receiving for your grain over the period of 4 or 5 years? In other words, soybeans has fallen, corn has fallen.
That was just part of the calculation. When we did they just entered into the calculation for the dollars per acre for the yield. It accounted for the pricing. And this is Michael's, the 4-year experiment that he did. Again, purple is net change in income, brown is net change in yield. And this is Frank Moore in Northern Iowa. And he didn't report any change in yield that he would attribute to cover crops. And his net change in income is negative. So again, it's hard to draw definitive conclusions from 40 case studies that were very, very different. But nonetheless, we did feel that it showed that the economic benefit does take some time and some experimentation. And yet we did see a lot of benefits economically. Incentive programs further helped the bottom line. We did not put them in our calculations, obviously, but in each case study, you will see a graph that will show the effect of conservation programs. And in some cases, they make the difference between positive and negative, so very important. I think that it showed that adopters really reaped a lot of rewards from self-education. And Michael, again, is a great example of that. Very curious, very diligent, really just a super farmer in terms of learning and adapting. The reduced fertilizer costs really brought dramatic savings. That was true in all of our cases. And in all 4 cases, adoption of cover crops, until, of course, reduced erosion very significantly. I want to just go ahead and give this thanks to our 4 key stakeholders. It was really fantastic, the contribution that they've made. We can't thank them enough. The data that they shared and the time that they spent to work with us researchers was really well appreciated, and it has created incredible value for other farmers to speed up the learning curve. You know how Howard Buffett says that each farmer only has 4 chances to get it right, because that's about how many seasons you have. I really think that Michael and our other case study farmers are adding more chances to other farmers very generously with sharing this information. So we hope to get these case studies to farmers' communities. We hope to do a lot more of them in different regions that are more applicable for others outside the upper Mississippi River Basin. A social scientist at Purdue, Linda Property, is studying how best to do that, how best to get this information in the right hands. Sort of like Keith has this wonderful, wonderful information, and how do you get it in the right hands so people will act on it? I personally feel that there's a role for that by the certified crop advisors. I think that that's a nut that we have yet to crack. And of course, we're also seeking funding for more case studies so we can put these in regions all over the United States. Thank you so much. I really encourage everyone to offer feedback and ask lots of questions. This is only the beginning. We're going to do a lot more of these. We're really trying to help answer the question that all farmers have of how would this work on my farm? Thank you so much.
We can take care of passing them out. And then I wanted to point out on your agenda, there's a link. These studies are online, but not necessarily super easy to find. So if you follow that link or go to the NACD website, you can view all 4 of the case studies in greater detail there. And so I'm just going to work on switching over here. And then I'm going to let you adjust the microphone here to what works for you.
All right, see if that works pretty well there. Thanks. Yeah, like they said, we farm in northwest Missouri. We're just kind of in the general area of almost where the corners of Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska meet. We're about an hour north of Kansas City and an hour south of the Missouri-Iowa line. Farm with my dad and my brother. We basically share all the ground that we do. We're mostly a corn, soybean rotation, although as we've been doing more with cover crops, we've started incorporating more small grains back into the rotation. In our area, it's very hilly. A lot of terraces get built. And so having a small grain in the summer is a great opportunity to do some dirt work on the farm, any kind of repair work, or any kind of building of waterways and terraces during the summer. So we started bringing more wheat back into the rotation. Soft red winter wheat is what we grow. But we've also, in doing more with cover crops, been growing our own cover crop seed, Cereal Rye. This past year we grew some triticale that we really had some good results with, and also doing spring oats. We've been no-tilling since the mid-'80s, started adopting cover crops in the fall of 2012. Our typical cover crop rotation seems to be pretty close to what I saw driving in here. Saw a lot of corn stalk fields with a lot of green between the rows. That was really nice to see. But we do a lot of cereal rye or other small grains after corn, before beans, or sometimes we'll have some fields, depending on what our mix of acreage is. We'll do beans, small grain cover crop, and back to beans, just where we usually aren't 50-50 corn and beans. We usually have about 550 acres corn, or 550 acres beans, 450 corn, and then about 100 small grain. The way we usually manage our cover crops, plant into it while it's green and then spray afterward. We've been to some meetings before where they really recommended that instead of spraying and then planting. That way, in case it did die and you got a rain and you have all this dry, dead biomass locking in moisture, makes a headache of trying to get planted into that. And just the cover crop the planter seems to want to run through it a lot better when it's fresh and green rather than dry and brown and a lot stringier. And then we try to incorporate livestock when possible. I don't know if any of you have ever been to meetings where Gabe Brown has talked. We don't have any like management intensive, like mob grazing that we do. Ours is pretty bare bones. In the past, before adopting cover crops, we'd always have kind of our main summer pasture, and then over the winter, move our cattle up to where we have some hay fields on the side slopes, and then on the flatter areas of the ground is where we have our cash crops, our row crops, and then just basically turn them out on the soft field and let them pick over the stover and leftover corn cobs and anything, just to kind of help offset some of our hay costs, which is one way that cover crops have really been just a natural fit to our operation. Just wanted to put this up there, the little red asterisk up there, that's where we are in Missouri, and just kind of comparing how we are in terms of climate to Delaware. You guys feel a little bit warmer than us, but when, really looked at charts of rainfall. You guys get a little bit more rainfall, not as hilly as we are, and went and toured around a few fields here, a little bit sandier than us, so we skew more toward the clay end on the soils. But temperature-wise, we're pretty comparable. We're have about the same summertime temperatures. We get maybe just a little bit colder in the winter, and the rainfall, you guys have a little bit extra, but it seems like maybe some of the things that work for us might also work here as well. So this would be one of our typical, pretty much the kind of our bread and butter for cover crops. When we started in 2012, we did a few of our corn acres in cereal rye. Now, anytime we harvest corn, we always put a cover crop after, just because we like it so much, going ahead of beans. So this would be like our first year of planting cover crop. I think that was about 35 to 40 pounds per acre of rye. And then come May, that's after planting into it, terminate it, and then about a week or so later, a couple weeks later, have the beans poking through that rye residue. And then come August, you can kind of hardly tell that it's any different than any other soybean field out there. And this was one of the fields that was in the case study. For our multi-species mixes, we'll do those after small grains. We haven't done any after corn. Sometimes if you get a little bit farther south, when folks do harvest corn a little bit earlier, or if they do like seed corn, sometimes they'll mix in radishes, but we just haven't been able to really get that, or haven't really tried that much to try incorporating it into our area, because when we harvest corn, it's at best mid-September, but usually more the early end of October. And depending on your fall, you might get some really good growth on your radishes and turnips, but for us, we figure it's just a safer bet to stick with the small grains like the cereal rye. But that would have been a radish that was planted in 2015, which later on I'll kind of have a chart from from our case study showing how the costs and benefits lined up from each of the years. And 2015 was definitely a challenging year, not really because of the cover crops, but just because there really was no planting season for us. It just rained and rained and rained, and it's hard to get an economic benefit when you plant no crop. So we were at least able to, when we took prevent planting on it, we put a cover crop out there, and I think the next year it did yield some benefits for our farm. Another one that we like to use a lot of if we have a legume is a crimson clover. Saw some of that growing around here. We find that's a pretty nice thing to have. Sometimes when we want to plant corn, for us we usually shoot for, if it's April 10th, 12th, and conditions are right, that's usually when we try to start planting corn kind of mid-April, and on beans, end of April, beginning of May. So if we're shooting for that early April window, we really don't get as much of the bloom from the crimson clover, but sometimes if we have some mixes where we're planting soybeans into, we get a lot of the benefit from that. It gives a lot of habitat for pollinators and seems to offer some benefits to the soil as well from the rhizobia. Hairy vetch is another one that we have used in the past. We've kind of run into a few instances where we kind of catch on the planter and want to wind around some of, like where we have some spike closing wheels that cause a few issues. So we haven't used as much of that recently, but it's not something that I would write off as well, because when it works great. This was behind when I was planting some soybeans into this area. It was one of those prevent plant fields, and it seemed to do a great job. The duals on the tractor, it was a 6-row planter with the tractor in front with the duals, and it just flattened the rye. And we don't use coulters on our planter. We noticed that when we took the wavy coulters off, it seemed to do a much better job of slicing through the residue and making a much nicer furrow. But that would be an instance. That's one of the marker arms on the planter of where the vetch wanted to wind around. One of the learning curve things that you have to deal with. And that's pretty much the best solution that I found. To just grab a steak knife and just saw through it. It seemed to come off pretty well, but it was one of those little things that you just kind of have to deal with when you're dabbling in new things and trying it. So one thing we did this year that worked really well for us, and we're definitely going to do more of it this coming year, is immediately after corn harvest, just broadcasting the fertilizer cart, our cereal rye or triticale, or if we had any wheat seed, and then just not incorporating it, letting whatever rains we got work it in. And this fall we had some timely rains and good temperatures to get some good growth. A lot of that was broadcast, especially when it was broadcast in middle September. It did a really good job coming up, and we, for the most part, did about 80 pounds per acre, but in the instance I'll show in a bit here, 200 pounds per acre, we only shot for that high of a rate was because from cleaning our own seed, we had a lot of leftover seed cleanings that did have a good amount of viable seed in it. And for the acres that we were wanting to use it on, we had way more cleanings than what we had acres to put it on. So we just basically opened up the gate on the fertilizer cart and just went. And it made a very, very nice thick stand cover crops. But we tried to, on our corn, mix a few for us earlier maturing varieties like 101-day corn, plant that at the beginning of the year, and then as we go along, move into the 110, 112-day maturities so that we can get some of those early harvested acres in September, because usually we also seem to get a better price if we can get some corn out earlier. Usually the elevators pay a little bit more if you can get it in before the October rush. So this would be an example of where we broadcast this year. That's just about 5 days after it was broadcast, had good temperatures, about ½ inch of rain, and the rye was very thick, coming up well. Now, about another week later, had a little bit more rainfall, which is one plus about getting cover crops out of immediately after harvest. When you have those downtimes during harvest, when maybe you get a rain and you're out of the field, at least you're getting some benefit out of that rainfall by getting a cover crop started and growing. And then that's that same field a little bit later in the month, about a couple weeks later, had again ample rainfall, good temperatures. And that field back there was where we turned our cows out into, and I think that's probably the longest we've ever had to go without feeding them any hay. That's one thing that we've noticed on incorporating cover crops. It's really helped us save a lot on our hay costs. But this would be more typical of what I think we would do in the future. Shoot about for 80 pounds per acre. Usually, rule of thumb, you always hear double your seeding rate if you're broadcasting versus drilling. So what we normally do, 40 pounds per acre, that's for most of our cost share programs, at least through our soil water districts, they have you put at least 40 pounds on. And so we just decided to double that. It had, again, decent rainfall, decent temperatures, and it's one of our best stands of rye ever. So we really like being able to broadcast it as opposed to using the 15-foot drill. We covered way more acres in a lot less time. It really helped save us on time and labor costs. This was also our first year doing some aerial seeding. We seeded into soybeans at leaf yellow. We had some of our own clean triticale, also mixed some crimson clover, radishes, turnips in it. And there's one thing where I'm not sure if it was something that we would do much of in the future. I think we get better results when we're either drilling or broadcasting after harvest, but it was something that we were interested in because we've never aerial seeded before. It was seeded on September 12th, and again, like on the rye, it had pretty ample rainfall, good temperatures. You could see where between the beans, as they're dying down, those brassicas and the triticale are kind of growing up through it. And this is kind of where it was once we were heading into winter. You kind of had a little green sheen on the field, but not even coverage. It's kind of right in the center of the field where the plane is definitely going to hit its mark. That's where it was the thickest. But this would be on the case study, on at least on our, where you can go online, or if there's, they also have some paper copies too, the chart that basically breaks it down for us, how our costs and benefits netted out. And so that first year of adoption, where in Marcy's presentation, it showed a negative for the corn yield, positive for the bean yield, and all of those are basically based on what was our corn yield prior to adoption, and then what was our crop yield after adoption. So in 2013, it's our first year doing cover crops. We planted a cover crop mix, and we thought, all right, we're going to grow these legumes. We're going to go cold turkey on nitrogen. We're not going to do any fertilizing for this corn. We're going to see how much benefit we get from, about, I think it was 3 pounds of crimson clover and 5 pounds of hairy vetch in this mix. And we planted the corn in just around the end of May. It was around May 23rd, I think. And not surprisingly, going cold turkey was not such a good idea because, being our first time doing it, hadn't really, like Keith was saying, building up that biology, kind of getting sort of that soil infrastructure, I guess you would say, in place. The corn was lacking for fertility. Another aspect that also hindered it was anyone who planted at that time in 2013 basically had to replant. We had a couple days where we had heavy rains, cooler temperatures, and whether you were conventional, no-till, or cover crop, folks were replanting after that date. The only problem was we had this layer of residue on top, locking in all that moisture, which if the crop was growing and things were dry, that would have been great. But it's not a great situation to plant into a replant, because we probably would have just mudded things up and made it even worse. So we just kind of let the corn go and let it be. But whereas on the beans, compared to what our baseline was, we actually did see a yield benefit. And one thing I would mention on the cover or on the fields that are included in the case study, one of them has been pretty long-term no-till as far as I can remember. As soon as we started renting it, I think in around 2004, there's been no-till. I don't know what the prior field history was before then, but in the study of the Hilliard farm, my field, this is its first, basically, first time being no-till and cover crop, because as soon as I bought the farm in 2000, I guess, winter of 2011, and then first year of farming in 2012 was its first time being no-till, and then 2013 after that, it's been a continuously covered crop ever since. Another year that sticks out, like I was mentioning, 2015, that's where you see a big negative in our study, but again, that's because one of the fields in that study had no crop on it at all. It was getting toward the end of the crop insurance date when they'll actually keep allowing you to plant, or we were pushing up against that, and it went past it. We decided rather than try to mud in soybeans and get like a poor yield, we figured we'd just get more benefit if we just declared prevent plant and put a cover crop out there, which there was already cereal rye that the beans were going to go into, so we just bush hogged the rye, it reseeded itself, we planted a cover crop mix into it. It gave us a lot of great grazing in the winter, so that saved us on hay costs. So it was one thing that could have been a headache that year that I think we were able to at least glean some benefits from it, from something that was a hassle with having all that moisture out there preventing us from getting planted in a timely fashion. But then 2016 was another year where we had some benefits from both increased yield, and on the Hilliard farm, that was where we would have seen a lot of the benefit, where I didn't fertilize at all. I've been putting some P and K out each year, usually about a 10, 50, 50 every year for whether it was beans or wheat, and then fertilizing the wheat with urea for dry. But 2016 didn't put anything out and had the best bean yields that I had there so far. Granted, only a 4-year history that I have of experience with that farm, but it was encouraging to me to see that, in a year when I wanted to kind of cut back, save the money, there weren't any drawbacks. And so I guess that's one takeaway from the study for me, is that sometimes when people talk about doing no-till or cover crops, they're like, well, after 5, 10, 20 years, sometimes they say you have to wait a long time. For us, the benefits happen quickly, and they happen during a time when we were, kind of making some failures because it was a learning curve. We weren't experienced with it. We were making some mistakes and learning from them. And so even during the time that would probably be the most challenging, we still were seeing immediate benefits. It wasn't taking, it's really long-term commitment, which, I hope as the years go by, we'll continue to see those benefits accrue. But it was nice to see that it's not something where you have to just grit your teeth and stick with it, and then, once you come out the other side, it's going to be better. It already was showing benefits for us. The other part that stuck out to me was, they still were profitable to implement without cost share. If there are cost share opportunities, we always use them. But if they're not available, we're not just going to quit and stop doing cover crops, because we see enough benefits in other instances that we want to stick with it. And this would just be also from this case study, the chart that they had on there of just how the costs and the benefits were broken down. The main cost with cover crops is the planting, which that lumps both the cost of the seed and the cost of planting, which the way kind of the study worked is I basically just gave them my record books, and I had it all on computer on an Excel spreadsheet, and said, here's how I estimate my costs, here's how I estimate my seed costs. I kind of figured out how much I wanted to be considered paid hourly in a sense for learning activities. That's one thing that they brought up that I hadn't even considered in terms of a cost of cover crops, just because I like reading about it anyway, so I didn't think of it as a cost, but it was kind of good to sort of reimburse yourself for all the learning and other things that you do, going to meetings, stuff like that. So for planting, usually, if I remember right, came out probably at about $25 an acre is what I was calling the cost of planting, maybe 25, 27, we call it $12 an acre for our own planting. We'll find folks in our area who would plant maybe for 13, 14, 15 bucks if they were to do custom planting for you. Not sure what kind of a typical rate would be around here. Some would come in with a no-till drill. But that's kind of what we reimbursed ourselves for, because that seemed to kind of jive well with what our books were saying. And then as far as the annual benefits that we got from the cover crops, one, there was the conservation incentives, whether it's EQIP, CSP, soil water district cost share, the yield benefit on beans especially saw a yield benefit, but also on corn once we kind of got past the whole idea of going cold turkey on nitrogen, instead trying to work more with the residue, then we started to see those yield benefits accrue. Fertilizer application, again, basically I just told them this is how much fertilizer I would typically use, and they used kind of those baseline years, which for my records would have been, I think, 2010, 11, and 12 before adopting cover crops. So whatever I was doing then, whatever changed after that, that's how they figured that up. And so reduced fertilizer inputs. Cattle grazing, that was one where I was kind of trying to figure out how I wanted to put a dollar value on that. And for us, I found the easiest way to figure it up was how much hay would we normally feed, how much hay did we not feed when doing the cover crops. And what it came out to about for us, it always seemed like, was if we had a nice stand of a cover crop mix, usually about a bale per acre of cover crops, depending on how many cows were run on it. But that usually was kind of a pretty typical thing that we'd see, which as far as the dollar value for every bale of hay, I think in our records, I called it about $30 for us. You know, you could buy hay probably for $40 in our area. I kind of tried to go there a little bit on the conservative side, but my brother was looking recently at hay prices where we're kind of in a drought scenario, and he was seeing where, you know, farther down south, like in Texas, they're buying, you know, like 1,300 pound round bales of hay for $100 a bale. So, you know, during those really lean years where maybe hay's short, that grazing benefit, especially in our situation where, you know, that's kind of what we rely on feeding cattle over the winter, it, you know, increases even more. The erosion related repairs, again, for figuring that out, initially I was kind of thinking of it as a cost per acre, but from us, most of it's spent, you know, time spent cleaning out terraces, repairing waterways, stuff like that. And so kind of decided to calculate that as a cost per hour. And I basically just looked up what you get for a custom rate, which I think for like a skid steer loader, they had $60 an hour, which seemed a bit much for reimbursing myself. So I think I went out with half that. I thought that seemed pretty reasonable. It was kind of, you know, where we're not custom hiring it out. So on all of my cost estimates, I tried to, you know, not under reimburse us for it, but also not extravagantly blow up what I thought the cost of things was. And then the termination, that would have been a small benefit, and that basically was fields where, just judging by how neighbors' fields look, where we don't have as much cover crop adoption in our area yet, just looking at what kind of weed escapes they had and thinking about, you know, in years past, what kind of spot spraying would we have to do after we do a post-emergent spraying on soybeans. And that was another thing that was a benefit by avoiding doing some of those extra spraying passes in the year. So this would be an example of where we had some erosion control. This is one thing that we'll do in some ground where maybe you have some ephemeral gullies, areas like that. We'll seed cover crops, maybe, you know, if we're just needing to cover the acres and get it done before it gets really cold in the fall. We'll put a few passes of a cover crop up and down the ditches, and that does a really good job of stopping any erosion. You can see right there where the corn stalks that would have normally been pushed downhill, washed to that part where the water concentrates, and then it gets pushed off the farm. Instead, it stopped right there at the cereal rye. Granted, the water starts flowing along there where it mounts it up, which just goes to show the benefit of having the entire field covered. And that is another example. This would have been on the Hilliard farm, which was in the case study. Had a stand of rye, and the neighbor from uphill had a lot of soil wash off of their field, and the rye caught it, did a great job. I figured it was a pretty decent way of getting some free land. And that's one thing that those erosion related erosion control benefits then translate into water quality, rather than having this, you know, river of chocolate milk looking water coming off your farm. It runs clear, it runs slow, it runs clean, which is a benefit for everyone, both in terms of slowing that water down, letting it percolate into the soil, rather than just, you know, running off your field and carrying away the fertilizer investments that you've made. And those all basically tie back to soil health by having good structure, having the soil covered, having, you know, active biology, earthworms making those pore spaces that allow water to move downward into the soil rather than across and off your field, that is what provides those benefits. This is something that we hadn't done a whole lot of soil testing, or we're just starting, I guess, to soil test on a lot of our fields where we had prior soil tests of before adopting cover crops, and then now that we've been doing cover crops for a few years, we're seeing some decent gains in organic matter that have been, really encouraging to see. So this field would have been, in 2011, it would have had corn crop, so then 2012 beans, 2013 corn, 2014 beans, 2015 had a small grain of cereal rye on it, and then 2016 was a corn crop after that, and then beans the following year. So, it's not an intensively cover crop situation. Usually it's corn, small grain cover crop, then beans, usually back to corn without a cover crop, or sometimes throwing that small grain in there. But on any field that we tested where we've been doing the cover crops, whether it had a small grain or not, usually saw over the course of the 5-year period about 0.5% bump in organic matter, which was really encouraging to see. Like this one, had about 0.6, 0.7. So that was just really good to see. And, things that you can just see for yourself and you pull up those root balls and see a much better structure than what you're used to seeing on your farm. It's nice to also kind of have that more scientific element kind of reaffirm what you're seeing. The weed control, going back to like spot spraying, any kind of extra spraying that needs to be done during the season, you can see on the left had soybeans with a cereal rye cover. Don't have any water hemp growing in through the rows. That's one of our main weeds in our area. Whereas on this side, you start to see water hemp growing through. Looks nice and green, but then once you kind of strip away the water hemp, there's a lot more green that it's contributing than the beans might be. And then yield-wise, there was no difference between these two sides. Sprayed the whole thing post-emergence, but when we came back for our typical post-emergence spraying, the whole field were covered in cereal rye. Maybe we wouldn't have to do that. There might have been a few here and there, but certainly on the cereal rye covered areas, nowhere near the weird weed pressure that we had on just our plain no-till with no cover crops. This is one thing, the grazing benefit. We can do a lot more on that. For us, I would consider our management on cattle to be bare bones minimum. There's no mob grazing. It's not rotational management intensive grazing. We basically, come winter time, we take them to where the crop fields and the hay ground is. We take, 1 or 2 cuttings of hay and then stockpile the rest for winter grazing. And on the stalk fields in the past, we just graze on whatever, if there are any ears of corn that got knocked down, leaves, stover, all that, they can pick through that. Well, now they have that fresh cereal rye growth to complement that. So it really seems to work well, having that kind of high carbon, dry, brown corn stover offset with this fresh, lush, green cereal rye growth in the fall. And they seem to complement each other really well. So that's something where I think we can increase our benefits from the grazing if we were to, get kind of our sort of infrastructure in place, have the fencing, the water, and everything to, do either some strip grazing over the winter or mob grazing. I think that figure of, where we're maybe getting a bale per acre of cover crops that we were saving, we could increase that even more. And another thing, going to the pollinators, that's, a benefit that we really didn't quantify in the study, but for us, it's one of those things where how do you put a dollar value on it, because they do a lot for us, whether it's forage like clover or your cash crops, or you have things like parasitic wasps, like what Keith was talking about, how they do a lot to control insects. I don't really have no way of hitting a dollar value on that, but I certainly think that by providing them some habitat with the cover crops, I think there's some benefit to be gained. Or even if you're just providing benefit like a habitat so that maybe other growers who are more reliant on, say, honeybees or native pollinators, like say if someone has an orchard or something, you're kind of providing a benefit to them as well. And that pretty much wraps it up for mine. If you want to contact me, that's my email, and that's just kind of the sources that I use for some of the temperature and soil rainfall data and all that. One thing I'd also mention on the costs and benefits I didn't touch on when I was on the slide, in our area where, it has much more slope and we put a lot of terraces in, I think there are a lot of places where we do put terraces so that we slow down the flow of water, control those ephemeral erosion areas. if we were just cover cropping it, we wouldn't have to do so many of those terraces, and it would save taxpayers in the state a lot of money because they're not having to pay to put in those terraces. But then it's also saving the farmer a lot of money because for this very small area, maybe it's 1, 2, 3 acres, they're maybe spending $20,000, if not more. Usually you do get some cost share to that, but still it's a pretty significant out-of-pocket expense for just one little spot in the field. And then plus then it becomes just something that you're going to have to continue to maintain throughout the years, have to clean up terrace channels, things like that in order to keep it going. Whereas if you can just put enough cover crops out there so that instead of having to catch the water with the terrace and then get rid of it, instead our goal is to use the cover crops to slow down the flow of water and sink it into the ground rather than, in a sense, by doing it with the terrace with the tile drainage, it kind of almost treats the water as a bit of a waste product. It concentrates it into this one drain and it gets rid of it off of your field. Well, then when we had a dry time, we kind of wish we had that water still. So it, just in being with the study, which is great working with DATU and the NACD, it really helped get me to thinking about all the different costs and benefits, even ones that I hadn't considered, like just the dollar value of water and things like that on our farm. So it was really worthwhile, and if anyone's ever interested in doing one, I'd really encourage it. I think it helped me a lot with just kind of my bookkeeping process in general, just kind of helping to really pin a dollar value on cover crops rather than just saying, well, in my gut, I think we like it, feels good, we like doing this. Kind of help give us more of a quantitative way of figuring out how much value it offered us. And any questions?
Yeah, we have time for a couple questions.
Double crop beans.
Yeah, do we double crop beans into wheat or after small grains? We actually, this past year was our first year of doing that in quite some time in the past before we do cover crops. Because really prior to 2012, I think it had been maybe 6 years before then was the last time we'd actually done a wheat crop. A lot of folks in our area have kind of gotten away from doing wheat. Then when they had that drought, I think it was in Russia in 2007 or 8, wheat prices kind of shot up. All the people who stuck to kind of that older rotation were sitting really pretty. And so kind of a lot of folks thought, well, we need to get back into doing some wheat. And again, on the terraces, it's a good thing to incorporate. But we do a little bit of double cropping beans, and I think we'll do some more of that now. But areas where we can turn the cows out into, I think we'll always focus on, if we can get cows in there, we'll try to put a cover crop mix just because of that grazing benefit. Areas where we can't turn the cows out into, and say if it's a decent piece of ground, we'll probably put some double crop beans out in there. If anything, just because at the end of harvest, we always like to run beans as the last thing through the combine before we clean it all out and vacuum it out. It seems, maybe there's no basis for it, but it seems like the mice maybe don't like beans as much as corn. They seem to eat anything anyway, but we usually try to run beans as the last thing through the combine. But the other thing would be if we're doing any terraces, we like being able to build terraces because there are areas that it's just deep enough slope when we're trying to row crop it. Probably ideally it's an area that should be put in permanent pasture, but you've got to pay the bills too. So it's those areas where maybe you'd be building some terraces. We like being able to build into that small grain stubble and then plant a cover crop onto it, and then that kind of helps hold it in place so that we don't have to do any touching up or erosion repair in the spring. So those would be areas where even if we can't get the cows to it, we still put a cover crop in there just for kind of the erosion control benefits. And usually that ground is probably where we're trying to maybe hamper it a little bit and put more of that organic matter back in, which is another reason why we focus on putting a cover crop in there too. But yeah, we will do some double crop beans.
Do you see much damage to the ground from your cattle grazing it? See much damage by footprints?
Like compaction and things like that?
Well, like footprints and stuff. Next year in terms of.
Yeah, no, we haven't really noticed that. And I think there's even been, University of Nebraska in terms of like damage from, cattle being concentrated in footprints, where again, I think they're not doing any kind of management intensive rotational mob grazing. They just kind of overwinter, I think it was feeders on stalk ground, and they really didn't find any compaction differences. I think actually on ground where they had soft fields and they grazed their steers on it, they usually saw a soybean yield bump, and they weren't even using cover crops or anything. So we haven't really seen it, and actually sometimes we like putting the cover crops on fields where maybe you have an area where it's not a bad enough ditch that we're going to try and build a terrace, but it's something that you either have to, in the past, you're not supposed to do it, but you kind of smooth it up so you can get across it. We'll sometimes maybe put a bale of hay there, maybe hay your radishes and turn this around there, put a bale in there, and turn the cows out in where they all concentrate in that area. It seems to do a lot better of kind of leveling that out without disturbing the soil structure, as opposed to what pulling a field cultivator through there would do. And we've had pretty good luck with that, on areas of the fields where we're just like, I really don't want to build a terrace here because that's just going to be a hassle to deal with. And that seems to be a good way of actually kind of improving sort of the lay of the land a little bit.
Any other questions? I actually have one, and it sounds like that'll kind of wrap it up. But Marcy, with the NACD case studies, that was a competitive process, right? You put out sort of a call for people to work with, and then you selected for people, to do the actual case studies. What were you looking for, and how did you go about selecting people? Like, kind of what qualities did they have to make a good case study?
Sure. One of the first qualities they had to have is data, so that we could set a good baseline. We wanted to use at least 3 to 5 years of good data for the baseline, and then our study lasted for 3 years, so we were able to get the data we needed for those 3 years. So we really had to have good foundation data. And we also, it was a bit of a time commitment. That said, when you're doing research with farmers, we personally believe that the burden of data entry should be on the researchers. We definitely don't want farmers sitting at their laptop when really that's our job.
Okay, you're already done, but I got you the microphone. If there was any.
But okay, so in addition to the data, you're looking for characteristics. We wanted as much diversity as possible. So we had a little bit of diversity in farm size, and a little bit of diversity in the operations, and that some had animal operations and some didn't. But we did end up with all corn sorting rotations. With just 4 studies, that was plenty of diversity for just 4. But that's pretty much what we were looking at. And the commitment, we really lucked up because the 4 farmers that we worked with really came through. Because 3 years is kind of long time to stay committed to one project, and they all came through for us really well.